Hello everybody, this is Jellicle's Farmer. My name is Lalita and welcome to Mushrooms on Mars. Let me introduce myself first. I've been a farmer for 12 years and my vision has always been rooted in the future where we have small acreage farming that thrives with automation, AI, robotics, and all the good stuff. But it is difficult to bring in all of that innovation and technology to small acreage farming because it doesn't scale. So I started 100 Acre Hub, where the idea is to bring together many small acreage farmers who are interested in technology and innovation and automation especially. And we all farm cooperatively, we sell cooperatively, and we definitely use automation to minimize manual labor so that all the repetitive dirty work is done by machines and not by human beings. So this was my passion for the longest time. But during the COVID lockdown, I got interested in space farming. Why space farming? Because it is one of the most constrained environments possible for growing food. It is one of the harshest environments. So if we can make it in space, we can make it anywhere on Earth. Further, anything that we do for space can be modified to use in constrained environments on Earth. For example, if there is no water in space, or we have very little water, whatever technology that we use for space farming, with the constraint of less access to water in mind, then we can apply the same technology here on Earth where there are droughts, where the constraint is water. In space, there's constraint of inputs. There's constraint of good soil. And on Earth, maybe we don't have a place where all of the constraints are present. But if we solve for space, we solve for Earth. We solve for all of Earth. So why Mars? Because Mars is a planet du jour. So it would be the ultimate challenge. And if we push ourselves to innovate in ways we have never imagined, then we're on to something, right? So, and that's how Mushrooms on Mars was born. The idea was something fun. It was like a joke. But the more I went deep into it, I saw something viable there. It is worth pursuing ag and space. So it was basically like wool gathering, out of science fiction books, talking with friends, brainstorming. It was a fun idea. And then it became an idea that is, that might be in the realm of possibility. So why mushrooms? Because mushrooms are not plants. They're completely different. We'll get into that later. There has been a lot of experiments on the ISS, the International Space Station, about growing vegetables and fruiting plants and leafy greens in space. I don't think they've done anything with mushrooms. They might have. I'm going to cover that in the upcoming podcasts. So mushrooms seems to be a first good step, in that direction. So it's not just about making mushroom bisque, because mushrooms are more than that. Mushrooms are, it's mycelium, right? So it's not just about edible mushrooms. We're also looking into all the wild possibilities that mushrooms can hold, like mycelium-based structures and growing food in alien soils, and creating ecosystems and creating closed loop systems. So the future of farming is right now, and it's right here, and it just might be out of this world. So let's move on to the first chapter. Okay, so the way to go about this is, I did a bunch of sleuthing on the web, research papers, and a lot of science fiction books. And I put together stuff in what I hope is in a cogent manner, and in steps that make sense. Okay, so bear with me. I think we'll have about 10 or 12 episodes for this season, and where I can give you an introduction. Okay, so we are going to start with the ISS, the International Space Station. What have they already done with space farming, or space gardening? And where can we go from there? And what about mushrooms? Why mushrooms? And why not mushrooms? Because there are many reasons we don't want to get into that, because there are challenges with it. The one thing straight away is that mushrooms are like us. They take in oxygen and they give out carbon dioxide, unlike plants. So, and they spread by spores. So we'll get into all that. So the way to enjoy this podcast is to take a look at the material that I've put in, the source material, that it'll be on the website, Jellicles Farm, under Mushrooms on Mars. And we have crafted what I call the deep dive into the material that's already been collected. So it's like two people discussing a subject, and it kind of gives the important points. And you can always, zoom in on anything of interest and do further deep dives into it, so we can kind of focus and magnify any issue or any point or any subject that interests you, or in this case, subjects that interested me. And that's how I have designed this podcast. So let's go into the first episode, which is ISS. What is already being grown on the ISS, and how does it work? So that's all for now.
Ever picture yourself as an astronaut on like a mission to Mars, right? You're looking out at that red landscape and suddenly, bam, you're hit with this craving, but not for any freeze-dried ice cream. No, you want a salad, a fresh one.
With a nice vinaigrette.
Exactly. And that, believe it or not, brings us to today's deep dive, space agriculture. We're going to be looking at some amazing research about, get this, plant experiments on, wait for it, the International Space Station.
The ISS.
Yeah, and this isn't just astronauts messing around with some zero-gravity gardening. This is about, building the foundation for humans out there among the stars.
It's about the future of space travel, really.
Totally. Imagine instead of relying on those resupply missions from Earth, all that back and forth, expensive, complicated, you name it, imagine growing your own food right there on the spacecraft.
Self-sufficiency. That's the key, especially for the long-haul trips we're dreaming of.
Right. Makes sense. Even here, a good meal can totally change your whole day.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's incredible how far we've come in such a short time, really. I mean, think about 2015, when those astronauts on the ISS had their first taste of space-grown lettuce.
I remember those pictures. Everyone was talking about it. Such a big deal.
Pivotal moment. That was the veggie experiment, and it proved definitively we could actually grow edible plants in that crazy microgravity environment.
But they didn't just stop at lettuce, did they?
No, no, not at all.
I was reading about like radishes and even zinnias, and wait, peppers too, for space pizza.
You're on top of it. Lots of variety, for sure. Those radishes, for example, they were part of research on how microgravity at like a fundamental level affects plant growth.
Wow, so even something that seems simple is giving us valuable data.
Absolutely. Every experiment, no matter how small, feeds into the big picture.
And those zinnias, I always thought those were so cool, like a splash of color in that super high-tech environment.
Right. Zinnias were huge for understanding how flowering plants reproduce in space, which, if you think about it, is vital for growing more complex crops down the line, like, say, tomatoes.
It's all connected.
Exactly.
So it's not just about having something to eat. It's about these bigger goals of like sustainable space travel and everything.
We got it. And a perfect example is that Plant Habitat 04 experiment back in 2021. They actually managed to grow capsicum annuum peppers.
Wait, a specific type of pepper?
It's a chili pepper.
Uh-huh. So that's where the space pizza toppings come in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it also highlights something really important, that psychological boost fresh food can give you, especially on these long, isolated missions. Imagine months of nothing but prepackaged meals.
Gets old.
A little spice, literally and figuratively, can make all the difference in the world.
So they're basically making a farmer's market up there.
Well,
But it can't all be easy, can it? Growing stuff in space.
You're right about that. There are definitely challenges. It's one thing to grow, lettuce, but it's a whole other thing to talk about crops that could really, truly sustain a mission when you're talking long term.
Right. Like, what about potatoes? I was reading that they're like the perfect candidate for space farming, but actually growing them in microgravity, whole different story, right? Why is it so hard?
Well, think about it. Here on Earth, gravity is just a given. It's just there. And it helps, distribute the water and nutrients evenly around the roots of the plant. But up in space, well.
Yeah, it's a whole new ballgame. So how do you even approach that?
Scientists are trying all sorts of things, like experimenting with different growing mediums and different techniques to try to recreate conditions similar to Earth. Things like, for example, aeroponics, where the plant roots are just hanging there, suspended in the air, and they get sprayed with this nutrient solution. Wild stuff.
It's like space agriculture is pushing the boundaries of what we even think of as agriculture, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And what's really cool is how the knowledge gained from these experiments, these space experiments, can actually have a huge impact back here on Earth.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, if you know how to grow food efficiently in a controlled environment with very limited resources, which is exactly what they're doing up on the space station, that could be massively helpful in so many places on Earth. Think about arid regions, disaster areas, even just urban settings where space is limited.
That's incredible. It's like the quest to figure out sustainable space travel could actually lead to agricultural breakthroughs right here at home.
Exactly. It really shows how interconnected scientific exploration is, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Now, you were talking about potatoes, which are definitely promising, but there's this whole range of other crops that researchers are looking at for these long-duration missions.
Anything like super interesting.
One that comes to mind is Mizuna. It's actually a type of Japanese mustard green.
Mizuna. Okay, never even heard of it. What's so special about it?
Well, it grows really quickly, which is a huge plus, and it's packed with nutrients. And from what they've seen so far on the ISS, it seems to adapt really well to the whole space environment thing.
So it's like the astronaut's superfood.
You could say that. Plus, it adds a little variety to the menu, which I'm sure they appreciate.
I bet. What else?
They've also been experimenting with onions.
Onions? Really?
Yeah. They're actually pretty easy to grow, which helps, and they add a lot of flavor to food.
It's kind of mind-blowing, to think about these astronauts millions of miles from Earth chopping up fresh onions for their meal.
Right. It seems like a small thing, but it's those little touches that can make a world of difference, I think. Especially when you're on a long mission like that. This little piece of home,
Speaking of home, do you ever think about how these advances in space agriculture, this whole thing that we've been talking about, could help here on Earth, like with food security and all that? It's like we're coming full circle, right? We look to space, we push ourselves to see what's out there, and in the process, we discover these ways to sustain life, not just somewhere out there, but right back here too.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? This whole idea of space exploration leading to innovations that could, completely change how we think about agriculture here on Earth. especially when we're talking about places with tough conditions.
It's like those first pictures we ever got of Earth from space, That little blue marble looking so fragile against the vastness of everything. It made us see our planet's limits, and now with space agriculture, it's like we're figuring out ways to break past those limits.
Exactly. It's about understanding what's possible, and not just up on a space station, but here on Earth, too. Think about it. If we can create these thriving gardens in a place as harsh and unforgiving as space, well, the possibilities are endless, right? For sustainable agriculture in arid areas, places hit by disasters, even just like urban food deserts, you name it.
We've talked about the practical stuff, right? The self-sufficiency thing, how plants can be part of life support systems. But I keep thinking back to something you said earlier about the psychological impact, how fresh food can remind astronauts of home. It's like these space gardens are way more than just, I don't know, a way to get your vitamins.
Absolutely. They represent resilience, that human ingenuity, our need to nurture life, even when we're in the most unexpected places. Remember that experiment with barley they did?
Barley.
Yeah. Not to make bread, though, to make beer.
Okay, now that's an experiment that I can get behind. Space beer.
Right. And sure, it might seem kind of silly on the surface, but when you think about the camaraderie, that feeling of normalcy it could bring to astronauts stuck on a long, difficult mission, that's huge. A little reminder that even when you're surrounded by the vastness of space, you can still find ways to celebrate, connect, feel a little more human.
So what would you say to those listening who are thinking, okay, space gardens are neat and all, but how does this affect me? What would you say to them?
I'd say next time you see a picture of those astronauts up on the ISS, having a meal with actual fresh produce, don't just see it as some weird science project. See it as something more. It's a testament to what humans can do, that boundless capacity we have to adapt, to innovate, to figure things out. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It's like we're becoming, I don't know, gardeners of the galaxy or something, learning how to cultivate life in the most unexpected places.
Exactly. And it's that spirit, that drive to see what's possible, to push the boundaries, that's going to help us solve the challenges facing our planet, whether it's today or 100 years from now.
It really is food for thought.
Yeah.
This has been incredible, this whole deep dive,
Oh.
exploring everything from like the nitty-gritty of growing lettuce in space all the way to the bigger picture about humans becoming this space-faring species, what that means,
And you know what? It all starts with something as simple as a seed.
And a whole lot of ingenuity, I'd say. Thanks for joining us on this journey into space agriculture. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep looking up.
So, what did you think? So, this episode was about a variety of crops that have been successfully grown on the ISS. It's all part of NASA's efforts to understand how plants behave in microgravity, because we have gravity here on Earth. In space, and especially on Mars, gravity is not as strong as it is on Earth. And that is so important, especially for root development, or how plants or even mushrooms, it's called gravitropism, where they know how to go up and straight, right? So the crops that are being grown on the ISS helped us understand how plants behave in microgravity and how to prepare for long duration space missions. So these experiments are crucial for developing sustainable life support systems for any other future missions that we might have to Moon, the Mars, and beyond that, or just space habitats, So the crops that were grown, of course, lettuce. Now, people who have known me know that I have no love lost for lettuce. It's not high calorie. It is mostly water. It's not nutrient dense, and it's hard rock. To me, that is not food. But lettuce is loved by millions and millions of people. So I guess it's a legit crop to grow even in space, although I don't know why. But lettuce, red romaine lettuce, was one of the most well-known crops grown on the ISS. And it was part of NASA's veggie experiment. We will cover this later. So I think it was the first crop eaten by the astronauts in space in 2015. Then they grew radishes. It's really fast growing. Even on Earth, you can have a crop in like 40 to 50 days from seed to harvest. So it's very short growth cycle. And then of course zinnias, you heard it because they're flowering. That's very useful. Any fruiting crop needs to flower, right? And flowering is important to collect seeds. So zinnias, wheat, that's an important crop. It's grains are important because they're extremely calorie dense. They're also nutrient dense. So it packs in so many calories in like 1 kilo or 1 pound versus like 1 kilo or 1 pound of lettuce. So that was another important crop. Mustard greens. It's a leafy vegetable, very nutritious, better than lettuce, and it's very easy to grow. Tomatoes, we all love tomatoes. Tomatoes are awesome because they're more complex than leafy greens, but it's a very important test crop. It's like the fruit fly of experimentation in biology because we can really experiment with the genetics of tomato. And then there is peppers. They grew peppers. Barley is important. Maybe for space beer, as we heard before. Rice. Rice has been growing on ISS to figure out, because these are staples. Rice, wheat, these are important. They're the staple crops. You're not going to get full on lettuce. We need grains. They should be growing lentils too. It's a good source of protein and along with carbs. And of course, cabbage, like Chinese cabbage. It was grown in ISS. It's very fast growing. It's nutrient rich and just like mustard greens, and it grows fast like lettuce. Sunflowers. Now, I love sunflowers. I'm going to have to, I can go on about sunflowers. They are awesome. The way the sunflower always follows the sun. That's why they're called sunflowers. It is fascinating how they have evolved. The reason why they always turn towards the sun. Have you seen a sunflower field? The heads turn with the sun. It's the most beautiful thing, and it is fascinating why they do that. So, and that is important to understand microgravity and how plants act in space. Potatoes, we can't do without potatoes. Now, they've not been fully grown in space yet. Okay. So there's a lot of experiments underway. They're very nutrient dense. I mean, they pack quite a punch when it comes to calories per pound. It's a significant calorie source, especially for long missions. It's very versatile. It stores well. It is the perfect crop for space, but it's not been studied fully yet. Mizuna, I love Mizuna. Again, it's a leafy green. There's a lot of leafy greens. Mustard greens, mizuna, lettuce, and of course, cabbage. Onions, onions are interesting because they grow underneath. It's a root part, right? It's not the leafy green. It's grown under the soil. So other than the fact that we all love onions and everything in the onion family, like chives, and we got to know how to keep away space vampires with garlic too. Okay. So the NASA uses specialized systems to grow these plants. One is a veggie plant growth system. Okay, it's an open air plant chamber. It has LED lights and all of, like radish, the lettuce, and the flowers are all grown there. And then there is advanced plant habitat, which is the APH. It's a fully automated system. Okay, it's much larger than the veggie system. And it has very precise environmental controls to study plant growth in microgravity. And it's used for growing complex plants like peppers and wheat. And then there's a bioculture system. This is more about cellular ag and tissues, and it's not for edible food per se, but this is very important. This system is used for plant biology experiments in space and for a lot more. So this can help us figure out how to grow or 3D print animal proteins in space, like a steak without a cow, things like that. Or, if I have to push it further, I would say, can it really grow organs for us in space? Maybe, we don't know. That's why it's experimental, for experimenting. So growing plants in space is important. We know sustainability issues, long duration, astronauts get bored, the mental well-being, all that good stuff. But also because we have to know how to create closed-loop life support system. On Earth, the system already exists. We're kind of exploiting it and not tending to it well, but the system is already in place. Our ecosystem is one of the most elegant and well-crafted closed loop system. Okay, so which is why it's very important that we protect it. So all this research in space helps us create closed loop life support systems. So which means we're going to have plants that can recycle carbon dioxide into oxygen, and it contributes to life support systems in space because we need oxygen, right? So, and of course, all this research for space colonies, maybe space habitats, if and when we become multiplanetary. And we can only tinker with our DNA so much because it took gazillion years for us to evolve into who we are, right? We can't synthesize our own food. We need other organisms to do this synthesis for us. And the OG here on Earth is photosynthesis, right? And that's how this planet was formed. But when we go into space, we're going into an alien territory where the environment is not suited for us, okay? And we cannot evolve fast enough to adjust to every new environment out there. So we still need food, so we do need food in any of the future space colonies that we can set up. So this research is pretty important for that. So the success of all these crops like lettuce, leafy greens, peppers, and tomatoes, which are fruiting vegetables, radishes and onions, which grow under the ground, and wheat, etc., it is to help scientists understand how to sustain human life in space. Now, we've not even come to mushrooms, right? So we will stop here now and see you all in the next episode. See ya.